Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's an honour to stand up and speak on Bill C-47, the Liberals' budget bill. And certainly I've had an opportunity to speak with my constituents on the concerns that they have for this Liberal legislation. And I would say that the thing that's been raised the most is, going into this budget, they were told by the Liberal finance minister that there would be some fiscal restraint. There would be a renewed, or for maybe the first time in their 8 years in power, a commitment to fiscal common sense. But that certainly didn't happen in this budget, as we see now a $43 billion deficit. Now, if that's the Liberals' definition of fiscal restraint, I'd hate to see what happens when they turn on the taps and say we're going to spend unreservedly. But when it comes to Canadians, they are now asking every single Canadian family to contribute an additional $4,300 to the Liberal government coffers to pay for their spending. Now, I want Canadians across the country to have a different perspective on what the Liberals are asking them to do. I'm asking Canadians to, consider themselves a shareholder in the Corporation of Canada. Every single Canadian is a shareholder in this country. When the Liberals say, we're taking on this debt so Canadians don't have to, it's extremely misleading. The main funder of this Corporation of Canada is the Canadian taxpayer. So if I'm the Liberal Minister of Finance and I'm asking Canadians to fund our $43 billion deficit spending with an additional $4,300 per family, as the shareholder of that company, the first question I'm going to ask is, what is my return on investment? What is my ROI on an additional call out for cash from the Liberal government? If the Liberal government has to explain to Canadians what their ROI is on that additional tax grab, it's a pretty tough sell. Well, Canadians, we have a $30+ billion infrastructure bank. It hasn't built a single project. We have chaos at the airports. Well, you can't get a passport if you want one. You might not be able to get your questions asked on your tax return from the CRA. Well, the carbon tax is going up, and we're going to have skyrocketing inflation and food prices. We've lost the respect of our most trusted trading partners. We can't fund our own military and defend ourselves or respond to crises around the world. So other than that, your investment is well spent with the Liberal government in the Corporation of Canada. How would any common sense Canadian feel that this has been a good return on their investment? I would say there isn't a single Canadian that would say that the current Liberal government has been a good steward of Canadian tax dollars. I would say there's no government in Canadian history that has spent so much to achieve so little. I don't think there's a Canadian government in history that has spent so much on the bureaucracy and the public service to see it come to the state of such dysfunction. I don't think there's a Canadian government in history that is so committed to taxing Canadians into submission. And Madam Speaker, I don't think there's any better example than the Liberals' carbon tax. In a time of 40-year record high inflation, a struggling economy coming out of COVID and the pandemic, no other government in the world was increasing taxes through a carbon tax. Our #1 trading partner in the United States does not have a carbon tax, putting us and our farmers and our ranchers and our food producers, our manufacturers, Canadian industry at a stark competitive disadvantage. What makes it more frustrating for those Canadians who are being asked to contribute more to the Liberals' out-of-control spending, the Liberal carbon tax has been proven to be a sham. The latest reports confirm that they haven't met a single environmental target and emissions target they've set for themselves. And now the Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed what we've pretty much known all along, that the carbon tax costs Canadians more than they get back from the Liberal sham of a rebate. In fact, it's going to cost every Canadian family, certainly every Alberta family, about $1,500 a year. Surprise, surprise. Canadians aren't more better off paying a higher tax. I would ask the Liberal government to show me any tax that has made Canadians better off. But we kind of knew this when the Liberals brought in their C8, the carbon tax rebate for farmers that was supposed to make farmers whole. It was going to be revenue neutral. But now we've seen the numbers, and farmers get about 15% back in the carbon tax rebate from C8. So this is nothing new. The Liberals have been telling Canadians for years that you get more money back than you pay in the carbon tax through rebates, but the parliamentary budget offers have made that glaringly clear. That is not the case. It is costing Canadians money, and rather than admit their mistake that the carbon tax is a scam, the Liberals are doubling down. They increased the carbon tax again on April 1st, and on July 1st it will be imposed on Atlantic Canadians. Happy Canada Day. But what this government doesn't understand, and the NDP Liberal Carbon Tax Coalition doesn't understand, is there are very real consequences to these types of decisions. For example, when the carbon tax is tripled by 2030, it will cost an average Canadian farm $150,000 a year in carbon taxes alone. It is going to put the financial viability of Canadian agriculture and agri-food in jeopardy. It makes us uncompetitive. But we already had the most expensive harvest in Canadian history last year, and this is only going to add to those input costs. But for the average Canadian, the consequences are very simple. Higher carbon taxes, higher production costs, higher grocery prices at the grocery store. Every single Canadian is paying the price for the carbon tax coalition, and they are paying for it at the grocery store shelf. When they buy bread, when they buy pasta, fruit, vegetables, meat, milk, eggs, they are paying for it over and over and over again. I had one family, a constituent, tell me their grocery bill, they've got 4 kids, their grocery bill went up $700 a month. $700 a month. I don't know very many Canadian families who can afford that. And again, we're seeing the consequences of that. When 1 out of 5 Canadian families is skipping meals because they can't afford groceries. They can't afford to put food on the table for their families. They're having to make that decision. Do I pay my mortgage? Do I pay my heat and power bill? Or am I going to have to skip a meal? And we had the director of the Daily Food Bank in Toronto come to the Agriculture Committee a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about food security. And his comment was that our numbers in March quadrupled from what we have normally seen in visitors to the food bank. And I quote, "We are in a crisis. The Daily Food Bank and food banks in Toronto are at a breaking point. The numbers we are seeing are startling and horrific." There are very real consequences, Madam Speaker, when we increase costs and we increase taxes on Canadians and food production. And the numbers we are seeing at the food bank are a direct consequence of that. And Canada's Food Price Index is showing that groceries for a family of 4 are going to go up another $1,000 in 2023. But unfortunately, it's only going to get worse if the Liberal government continues with the policies that they are imposing. A recent study that came out last week from Dalhousie University is bracing Canadians for even higher food prices. By 2030, the average food price is going to go up 35%. Bread up 35%, dairy 40%, fruit and vegetables 29%, meat 45%. That is what will happen if the Liberals continue on this ideological policy drive that they are on. Increasing carbon taxes is increasing production costs, increasing regulation and red tape on transportation and supply chain means direct costs to Canadians. The solution to higher food prices and higher food costs is simple. And one of the steps they can take is eliminating the carbon tax. It's not meeting any environmental targets that they're setting themselves, and it is certainly causing more pain than anything else. And when the carbon tax is tripled, it will cost an average Alberta family $2,200 a year. So Madam Speaker, in conclusion, I ask the NDP Liberal Carbon Tax Coalition to reflect on the hurt and the pain that they're putting on Canadians. You know, in fact, the NDP party used to be the party of Canadian farmers. Exactly. I kind of wonder why they've lost that support over the years. Exactly. Maybe they should take some time and reflect on what that happened. Yeah. Madam Speaker, we cannot support this budget. We're going to stand up as Conservatives for Canadian families and affordability and not ideological policy that's hurting Canadians.